All right. Well, welcome everybody. I am C.R. Rowenson. Please call me Clark. I am a freelance developmental editor and do nonfiction about magic systems. But this isn't about me because I'm the moderator. This is all about these lovely folks over here. So let's go ahead and have you guys introduce yourselves with a little bit on your background and why you're on this panel. So I'll start with Dylan.
Hi, my name is Dylan Parker. I am the editor at Chapter One Publishing, Chapter One Editing. I do developmental edits as well as sensitivity reads. I'm also a co-host on the Puckle podcast. We are the longest-running Pokemon podcast, and we cover everything from news to even our spin-off show, which tackles a tabletop RPG within the PTU system, which is a real fun one.
Awesome.
But have you caught them all, is the question.
I caught them all from the day you were born. No.
They've instituted catch and release at this point. Rowan.
Hi, I'm Rowan North. I'm a freelance illustrator and art educator, which you may think like, wait, what? Why are you on a game panel? Well, I am also a GM, a pro GM on the side. I work with Black Feather Guild, and I do streams twice a week with them, and a player in one and GM in the other. And I've done that for a few years now. And yeah, my focus is actually horror settings. And yeah, you'd be surprised how well art and D&D or tabletop just really work together. So, yeah.
Well, I believe it. What makes it a good setting for a game? I mean, that's a really broad question, but go.
I can jump in. For me, when I am running a campaign or playing in a campaign, a good setting is one that I feel that either I as a player or as a DM have tools for the others to participate. It has engaging avenues, and it has some level of either plot hook or natural exploration that pull the characters into it. So there's something about it that makes it more than just rooms or a town. It's somewhere where the players can interact, can grow, and can make something happen.
I would agree that, anything can be a setting if you try hard enough. What was it? I was on a panel yesterday where they were talking about a setting that literally everyone was playing Amoeba. So legitimately anything is possible. The trick is to make sure it's dimensional. You are working with your players. It is a tale that you tell each other. You are working with them to build and flesh out this world. Like the corners should feel real. And that's the whole thing. If you just go on the adventure and the adventure fighting the boss, then it is not a fleshed out world. It's not a vivid, colorful world. It is just another dungeon crawl.
Okay, so that actually brings me to a question I was really excited to hear your answers to. With all of the stuff that you can dig into in a world and in a setting, what are the key components you really focus on when building one for a game?
For me, it tends to be player interactivity. It's some angle that the players have to engage with the world. If we're talking a traditional D&D kind of fantasy thing, that's going to be a world in which there are problems that need heroes to solve them. So I'm going to either invent bandit camps for low-leveled stuff. I'm going to maybe give them guilds or things that they can interact with. But it's giving them levers and buttons to push and pull so that they can try to make something happen. It's giving them ways to interact.
I would have to absolutely agree with Dylan on that one. For me, what I love to do is, work with my players and talk to them about their character backgrounds and try to put that into the world. You're not just a player that you ended up in Skyrim. Like, no, there is a reason you are there. There is a reason you're on that cart. And, you may run into characters from your past or pieces that tie it all together. One of my favorites was I did the Tickfa files, where actually the one of the player characters was actually kind of the leader of the town, like a very, very wealthy, rich plantation family that ended up being kind of like drug mob lords. And they basically were the ones that gave everyone a say, like had the whole town under their thumb. And that was very, very interesting to play with because it gave this new level of power to the player and work it all in.
Do you find there's certain elements that you gravitate towards, like factions, religions, resources, even monster races? Do you have a favorite? Do you find some more useful than others?
Is that in towards me or both of us?
Both. Yeah.
Okay, go.
This is always towards both.
Dylan, go. I can go forever. So please.
So recently, I've been dealing with a bit of an issue where I have to deal with a constructed canon. So for one of the campaigns that I'm dealing with, I have to make it at least recognizably fit into an existing franchise. So working around that has been freeing and constraining. So there was, for a different example, would be something like, I forget what the name of it was. It was a Powered by the Apocalypse thing that was running based off Kingdom Hearts. And so they had to pull a lot of these mechanics through. I find, at least in my experience, the things that I gravitate towards are things that are instantly recognizable so that the players don't have to wonder about how they're supposed to engage to get to something interesting.
Okay, cool. Real interesting. Real quickly, I want to interrupt and cut to Dan because it sounds like you can hear us now.
Yes, Dan, can you hear us?
I can hear you now. I don't know if you guys can hear me. I mean, everything was dead on my end when I tried to reboot into the first one.
So Dan, tell us a little bit about you and why you're here.
Okay, I'm here because I write Guildmaster Gaming. I also write for Tabletops and Tentacles and Tabletop United. I write game reviews for all types of tabletop games, plus other stuff of pop culture, reviewing books and movies. I have been playing role-playing games since the 70s and writing about games and building settings since the 80s.
Nice. So the best thing about being a moderator is I get to pick all your brains. So the question we're on right now is what aspects of the setting you find most helpful for engaging your players, and if there's certain components you really drift towards, like building factions or religions or monster races. But we'll give you a second to think on that. Rowan.
So like I said, I gravitate towards horror and horror settings. There's always kind of more of a fantastical element to my horror. Like, for instance, for both Grimm and the Tikva Files, they both kind of took place in the same world, as opposed to just being like, because they were both kind of Monster of the Week, as opposed to it just being like any of your normal like werewolves and things. I had the aspect of they are all fairy races. So every creature you encounter is fae in one way or another, and that was an aspect of horror I had, you don't really see. So, but that's still the thing, is I always go for more horrific settings. I do always end up with a bit of magic kind of involved. And, I always kind of have a little bit more like even Lovecraft inspired feels in my settings. And that's what I tend to gravitate towards. So things that are stressful for the characters, and I really love giving them time to interact with each other. I think that's the other thing I super gravitate towards is please role play and interact with each other. If we have like dungeon crawl munchkins, I have a harder time working with that.
Okay, Dan.
Okay, I just want to kind of throw in on top of that one. I saw an article earlier today that right now Call of Cthulhu is a larger RPG in Japan than D&D. So horror is a big thing. I try to work in my settings as things that give my character something to work as personalities. I think with my groups that I've ran with, personality play is really the heart of the RPG that they like to play and not the combat. So instead of trying to set up combat situations, set up puzzle situations, or like you say, different factions that get people working from one aspect mentally to another, and try to bring those in more and more. Okay.
Well, one question I have is how I can play in your guys' games, but that's something we can deal with later. What I would like to know, actually, is it sounds like from all around, one of the main focuses, if I'm hearing this, is you guys, as you're building your setting, you get very focused on the player and what their experience and what their engagement is going to come from. So I'm doing my best to try and keep this agnostic between video games and tabletop RPGs. But in that case, in either case, how much collaborative world and setting building do you do? Like bringing in either your players from the table or bringing in test players. How much of that collaborative world building do you try and do? And that's open to anybody.
I actually do quite a bit. I start out by the basics that I need to start the game that we're going to be running, and then I'll take notes on what the players are finding of interest and get their input. And there's been times when I've actually thrown it right back at them at the table. Of if they said, well, I'm going to go to the baker, I know, it's like, okay, who is it? And I throw that out and I get that collaboration back with them to build things.
That's beautiful. Dan, I try to do similar things, like asking them, all right, you're here. What does your day look like? Man, okay. A little bit of spoilers for what's coming up next Saturday in my campaign, Time Travelers. But I'm literally going to take them back in time, but they're basically being fed on by something, and their memories are being kind of fed on. So
Okay.
I'm going to be going through and saying, hey, what was your high school experience like? And then kind of mash that all together in one setting where they're now interacting with each other in high school where they have no idea what's going on. And then just have like little doorways into what's actually going on. But that is going to be so heavily based on what they were like and so heavily what their day-to-day life was like that and kind of the normal world and just bits of like creepiness in there I feel like I do my job right if I'm sitting back and letting the players just do their thing. I feel like that's always a good experience, and then I'll just nudge them a little here and there. And I've gotten that a lot with this group, and I'm really excited about that. But yeah, I try to have them explain to me even the small details, have them get into their characters' minds as much as possible.
Okay.
So I have had some very light experience helping with video game production, particularly some writing from a couple clients of mine that wanted me to work on something for them. And I was surprised by, world building it was a detailed fantasy RPG, and I was like, all right, where's your world Bible? And it was like 4 pages. That was it. And I was sitting there like, well, what are they going to do? Well, here's the thing. We just have a list we keep track of the proper nouns, because if the players don't run into it, all we have to do is make sure it doesn't contradict itself. And that has stuck with me, because in a video game, if you cannot walk there, as long as you don't violate what you've already said, people just go, yeah, that's what's happening. So there you don't have that opportunity for give and take. But what you can do is give them opportunities to draw their own conclusions and to make their own story. And if you seed enough small ideas, people will pick things up. If you're running a tabletop campaign, if your players go, I bet that's why that happens, you go, yes. And then you're good. But if you're building a setting for the RPG, for like a video game in particular, as long as you're not breaking your own established canon, a lot of the world building can just more or less be relegated to what the players are going to see. You don't need to know how every city gets its crops if they're never going to leave the one city that they're in.
Okay. This is leading to more and more questions, which is great. One thing I need to ask at this point is, I guess, what is the difference between building a setting for your novel as opposed to building it for your tabletop RPG versus for a video game?
So this is actually very interesting, because we are talking about doing a Skyrim tabletop next season on the Raven Evermore's channel, the Blackfeather Guild. So there is so much overlap. I feel like in video games there is definitely more streamlined to a certain extent. I really, personally, the games I do love like open world adventures, but I also really love farming sims and like stuff like Minecraft. Guess what I was playing before I was back on panels? Minecraft. So it's very hard to say. Like, I don't think a farming sim could work well in a tabletop, but it might, because Raven also is running a game this season that is literally based on Subnautica, and it's very number crunchy because of that reason, because it's all survival. How much do you manage to harvest? How much are you able to obtain if you go out? Like, what do you encounter? She even has like encounter dice, specific monsters that you can encounter in each area. Like, if you go into this area, you're going to end up with a Leviathan type creature. So
that game.
So I have no freaking idea. Like, anything is possible, my friends.
I think as the amount of control that the writer or creator has increases, the more that you need to flesh out a lot of what's happening in a book. You need to know, because there are going to be people who will read it with that fine-tooth comb, and they are going to pick it apart because that is where their attention is. If you're playing a video game, you get a little more leeway because the core gameplay loop, people will ignore a poor story for a strong gameplay loop. And sometimes they just don't have the brain power to crunch 1,000 item descriptions and lore dumps and fight monsters. It's one of my problems with Dark Souls. I do not have the brain space to go through everything and also dodge roll out of the way of the big scary man with an absurdly large hammer. RPGs kind of hit that middle road where you have other people who can put in their input, and that is something to rely on. But you do have to have consistent enough rules where they understand where they are and can more or less guess what would happen if they, stabbed an orphan on the street. Are people going to care? Because if you set up a grim enough place, they might legitimately think, oh, we can shake down the store in public. And if you're not conveying, oh no, this is a well-guarded street, they might feel cheated. You have to set those expectations. So you have a bit of a middle ground there.
Yeah, that's also when you do the GM thing of, are you sure?
Okay. Dan, what are your thoughts?
I think when you're building a novel or a short story even, you have to have a little bit more control over it, and you're putting a little bit more depth in it because you're managing all the characters in your story. And so they have that expectation as the writer and of your own characters, you have that expectation that they already know everything. In an RPG, it's a little bit looser because your characters don't know everything, but they should. That's kind of like what they were saying already is if they grew up in this world, they know the confounds, how that world is structured and what's kind of expected. So I think this is where they talk about, a session 0 comes in really good. If you're going to start something new that isn't in an established world that everybody already knows, is kind of throw out there some of the things. We had a lot of fun a few years back where we ran an orc campaign. Everybody played orcs in a fantasy setting, but the preliminary start was you were out on patrol and you just came back to your camp and it was devastated by a group of adventurers. And your tribe is gone. Now go. So if you have that type of thing, then you do have the idea. Yeah, they pretty much, the first thing is they went and raided the farms because they needed food. So you can, it's all depending on what you set up with the characters, and then you can go from there. But then I also like to say, start with what you need. In that setting, all I needed to start was the town that they were going to work with. And that was it. And then we built it from there as they started going out.
Okay. Yeah, I've definitely heard of that kind of method of just starting small and then growing outward as your players move outward, specifically with regards to tabletop. So if the amount of development you need to do varies depending on the medium you're doing between story, tabletop, and video game, this is the classic question of how do you know when you've got enough? How do you know that you can stop figuring out factions and their history and their fascinating interactions and just release it? And that's anybody.
I think it depends on where you're trying to release it. Is it to your own group, or are you writing something that you're publishing? Because if you're writing it for your own group, if you got enough to run that first adventure, you're good to go. If you're writing it for publication, then you need to get a little bit more in depth and more involved so that somebody else could start either in the location you want to use, or they can start someplace else in the broader setting that you've created.
I think especially if you're going for publication where you do not have the benefit of I can start small and expand, where you get one shot. You do not need everything hashed out, particularly if it's an RPG book where you're handing this splat book, someone's going to pick it up, run the adventure with their party. They'll be able to fill in small things. But what you need to do is give them enough information and enough tools and enough consistency where they can extrapolate. So you don't need every faction's interconnections and thousands of years of history and where the farms are and the water treatment, unless you do. And if you look at your narrative or what you have for the players to engage with, and there are multiple avenues that they might approach a problem, that's kind of where you need to start to cull. If you get too deep into it, you'll have a 400-page one-shot, and no one wants to run that.
That's
I don't know how you would run that as a one-shot, but
I don't know. Well, like for instance, talking about here's the problem with trying to plan a Skyrim campaign, right? There is so much lore, and it's trying to decide how much do we know that's enough? Like what point is it enough? Because there is so much. And it might just be that if we run this, we have to rely on the players to go, actually, and then build off of their knowledge. And then us together, sure, it might not be the most accurate thing, but at least we have fun. I think I'm going to go straight on to what Dan was saying, because it really depends upon what you are intending to do. If you are, I guess, writing this for other people, like who knows what details they are going to try to pick up on. I think about magic cards. Magic itself doesn't need details, but then they write books about them. And they release D&D books on some of the different settings and things like that. So the magic card game itself, playing the game, you don't need to know jack crap about everything. Maybe you see some recurring characters and be like, oh, that's fun. But then you get into the writing and the books and things like that, and that's when you have to fill in those details, and these artists and authors and the people making the cards have to kind of build off of that. It's the different levels of knowledge and meta knowledge.
Okay. So the answer to the broad and open-ended question is a broad and open-ended answer of when you have enough.
Precisely. You need very little to start a game, but you need a little more to flesh it out.
I think to put it in a very snippy answer, to boil it all down, is you have enough when you can do the project. When going from beginning to end, you don't anticipate needing to make a whole bunch up. I think that's kind of the gist.
Okay.
And you can actually expand on it. I was going to say, you can expand very easily. I ran a multi-year campaign that started in one city.
Okay. So it's very similar to what you guys were talking about before, of just if you're having to do something where you're either publishing it as a campaign setting or you're releasing it in a video game, because you're not going to have the benefit of that feedback. Same thing with a novel. You're going to need to do a lot more of that in-depth development to make sure you have all that you need.
Mm-hmm.
But it sounds like it's not necessarily as much as you think. So with that, how do you guys keep yourselves from getting sucked in to world building? How do you keep yourself vaccinated against world builder's disease?
I'll admit I don't.
It's no help, Dan. No help at all.
No, what I do though is I create it for me. I'll take notes from what I hear people saying or what I think would be fun to have, and I'll just keep building out on my world. I don't know when I might use it, but it also starts creating backstory that I can throw in and clues for other adventures. And I can start seeding things out way ahead of time because of some idea I had, months ago. So I kind of allow myself the creative time when I'm putting together my adventures for our group to expand my world as I do it. So it's mine. And then I keep a notebook on that. So if all of a sudden they come out and say, oh, well, we need to go do this. It's like, I've got something already that I can pull out and seed in and start building off of that old idea.
So with the tabletop stuff specifically, it sounds like the way you manage that is by starting the game before you're actually done world building.
Yeah, right. Because
Okay.
I think, like they say, like in even adventures and modules and writing books and all the way through, you could build a world and you could have this huge map of everything. But if your characters are never going to go to this other part of the world over here, why work it all up? So you can have a small part of it, have the map there, and then if they start going, oh, we need to go up there, then you can say, okay, I've already got some ideas, we'll just go with it.
Okay.
Have you ever seen The Gamers 2? Anyone here?
Yes.
Yes. So the whole thing with Gamers 2 is he's trying to write the campaign. He's trying to write it and publish it. But he can't get past it because his players just suck. But he always tries to streamline them, and they kind of fight against that. And it isn't until they run the full adventure that he's able to write it and kind of build it out more. And so I think that's just kind of more of a visual to what Dan is saying, is that sometimes the best thing is to, once again, work collaboratively with your players to build that world and flesh it out finally.
Okay.
One of my first campaigns, I tried to guess everything that could happen. And I drew out all these different things that could happen too. Like I drew pictures. I ended up burning myself out so hard. Don't laugh at me, Dan. I see you.
No.
Oh, we're laughing because we've been there.
But I can honestly say back in the 80s, I had a friend that he was so upset with his campaign because he had drawn out over 40 different dungeons and adventures for us to play, and we never got to them.
That hurts.
Yeah. So
Dylan,
I even planned out a character death, like a major character death at the end, and drew it, and the players wouldn't let me. So I did this really nice painting of the character dying. It's super dramatic, and they were like, "No, we're not letting this character die." And it's just like, well, I guess I'll put this art into storage.
Okay. Dylan, you're my last hope for getting an answer to this question. How do you stop yourself from getting the disease?
Deadlines. For me, it's that easy. If I have to start a project, whether that be, I play in very rules-heavy systems sometimes, where I cannot just grab 3 orcs from the monster manual and call it an encounter, where that is hours of prep time, and I only have so long between sessions. So my cure for world building is I have 6 hours to do this, and I need to have a session ready by Tuesday. Let's go. And if you're doing something like you're writing a campaign for publication, just setting yourself, even if it's not a hard deadline schedule, but setting out, I need to start writing by this day, I need to have this done by then. That's a really easy way to just get yourself out of that eternally world building scenario. And that is in a position where you can't. If you just want to goof around with your friends and it's going to be a home living room campaign, frankly, start and you can world build forever, and it's probably not going to be that big a deal as long as you don't burn out. But if you need to get something to the press, deadlines. It's the easiest cure for a world builder's disease.
Or running out of spoons in general. Don't got time for that.
Okay. So, I guess if you were building a setting, either for what's going to be a video game or is going to be a published setting or a personal setting for your personal game group, between those 3, do you worry about your setting being wholly original, or are there elements and tropes that you feel are completely justified and very helpful to remix into your worlds?
I try to have a couple of things that the players can look at and go, this is what this setting means to me. I am working with some people on a bunch of one-shots set in a singular city that we've called Blunted Fang. It's where a bunch of monsters have been domesticated. So it's like basilisks that have so many cataracts that their eyes are good for potions, but they can't actually turn you to stone. We had a couple of ideas, of these like monsters that were bred down, or specific buildings and halls that we would hope that players would be familiar with or be interested in. And we wanted those to stand out, be original, and not necessarily lean too hard in. But tropes are shortcuts, and that is not a bad thing. You can have those elements in your setting, and people will use them to, shortcut. They'll go, oh, this is the Proud Warrior race or Proud Warrior village. I understand a little bit of how I'm supposed to interact here. I don't have to ask 6 hours about their history and culture to try to say hello. The tropes exist as tools, especially in an interactive medium where people have to decide what they're going to do.
The thing with publishing and doing Twitch streams with your streams and with your games is that there does have to be like a level of difference if you're making money off of it. Just to be careful. So that's when you can go in, and this is kind of like a sideways angle from your question, and I apologize for that, but doing spoofs and parodies of other things, like that's totally fun for the players to go off of, or having things that they recognize and can make jokes about. So for instance, I did a one shot that took place in Disney World, where they had to fight both Disney and McTricky. And they were being led through Disney World by Deathpool, who who escaped the vault of Disney. I know, it's great, isn't it?
It just sounds like it's fun saying Disney.
Yeah. Like they get help from Dinkerdell and and what was it? Petra Pan is cannibal. What? But yeah, it's just everything goes wrong, and you can recognize those names and those tropes, and it was really fun doing a Mickey voice with him setting fire to the whole stage. Burn! But those are things that the players could have fun with, and things like that. Those were all but it is still a level different from the original. I took a lot of inspiration from what all does Disney have in their vault, what old cartoons are there, and things like that.
Okay. Dan, what about you?
I would say it's a good combination, kind of like what Dylan was saying, is especially depending, it's very genre dependent. I play a lot of different games, so you have some differences there. But tropes are something I usually try to use, and that gives players something they can latch onto and hold onto during the game. But then some unique items that they might know about that you can introduce into the world so that it sets it very much to that world. Otherwise, you might as well be grabbing an established setting and just playing off of that. You can use. I actually know someone that used the Forgotten Realms setting, and then they threw some twists so that it was very much their own world. So, but we all had the tropes of what is expected from TSR, and then we were able to build off of that based on what they gave us. So it's a good combination of introducing something that's unique, but giving them enough that they can hold on to and say, okay, it's not totally new because their characters are from the world.
Okay. So I think I have time for maybe one more question before we open up to questions from the audience. So with that, I want to know, are there any tropes or common elements you see that you wish would kind of just go away from game settings?
That's a hard one because you can always twist expectations with those tropes. I would say one that can be irritating is the orcs are stupid or these other races are stupid. That can be a little irritating. It's kind of outdated. Sorry to be that person. But it's like you can have way more creativity with that, even if you are using orcs at all. Like, they have their own way of life. You got to think about like their culture, even if you only like do a little bit there and don't focus on it too much. Just remember that, even animals in our world have their own societies and ways that they interact with each other. Like, hives have a queen and queens happen because they basically pick out a group and feed them royal jelly, and then one develops more than the others, and that becomes the queen. And they can sense when that queen is dying and start feeding the next round of children royal jelly, because they are that hive mind. And imagine applying that to fantasy creatures and things like that. Like, I would say, just don't do paper cutout races, don't do paper cutout enemies. I think that's the only one like trope that I would say.
I'll jump in one that I've seen, and I've seen it in writing too. And it's, I know one thing that a lot of time we tell authors not to do, and that is give your heroes faults. The faultless hero gets really boring in games because if they know everything, if they can do everything, nothing is truly a challenge.
Okay, yeah, my favorite characters to play are the ones that have the weird little quirks, because why not throw chaos in? Dylan, what about you?
One thing that exhausts me whenever I'm reading a setting, please do not do one-to-one fantasy counterpart cultures. And we can get into the ethicality of, cultural appropriation, but even not touching that, it takes me out of the experience. Because if I'm wandering around a well-realized setting and all of a sudden I am in an obvious analog for Japan, it feels weird. It doesn't feel organic. It doesn't feel like it's a new thing. It just feels like someone really wanted to put samurais in and had no context for what that meant other than this one specific thing.
I think, sorry to butt in, but I think that can be fixed simply by good storytelling and just, thinking it through, because you can totally have an analog for Japan if you write it correctly.
Right. And the issue is not, only set it with one like, that's not what I'm saying, but just the one-to-one hyper obvious mono story translation. That's when it gets dicey for me. There have absolutely been settings I've played that have had heavy influences from specific cultures or from general cultures, but it's when it doesn't have the work to explain it. It's when people just expect you to pick up, oh, this is just China, or this is just, the Middle East. Then it can get frustrating.
Okay. Good to know. Well, I think we're going to go ahead and open it up to questions from, I don't know, the audience, the channel. Questions from people watching.
Yeah, we have one from Ian. You kind of touched on this before, but how much of a setting do you plan out before jumping into playing the game?
Part of that depends on how long of a game I'm planning on running. If it's a one-shot, if I'm running a game for a convention, it's going to be very, very small. If it's something that I know that I've got a larger storyline I want to do, I'm going to put more time into it.
For me, before I sit down with anything, whether it's a one-shot or a longer campaign, I try to solve for 3 variables before I sit down, which are: where are we physically when we start? Who is the bad guy? And why are they in opposition to the party? If I can get these 3 things, I generally have enough of a conflict to start the first couple sessions.
I think the best ideas are I suppose the setting. That's very important. Just knowing enough about the setting. You have to have basically some sort of guide or teacher inciting incident. That I think is very important. Your call to adventure for your heroes. And then you kind of have to have a general idea of what they're fighting against. Your big main villain. Granted, those ideas can shift a little as the story goes on, but the time travelers plot, like I was saying, it's like, in general, my ideas come week to week. But in general, I have a few main ideas, and I, as the players interact with the world, I've shifted them a little and finalized ideas that I'm very, very excited about. But I really tried to keep this one as open as possible, which is a very, very hands-off kind of way to do it. But I still need that basic thing: setting, inciting incident and the evil they were fighting against.
Guess we're ready for our next question.
Okay, next one. This is also something that you mentioned kind of in passing, but monolithic cultures, for example, all orcs or barbarians or anything like that. Any tips on how to give these less fleshed out races some variation?
I'll jump in with a little bit here. When I ran my orc one, they eventually ended up in a city that we called Hork. And so creating orc NPCs that actually had other lives besides just going out and killing everybody. Like, who bakes the food? Who cooks the food? Who takes care of, the shop? Kind of apply that different personality traits to a different race of beings, and what is their cultural to that?
For me, there was a great, I don't remember the exact, it's been years since I looked into this, but there was a story, a creative writing exercise about the Klingon barber. These kinds of ideas are really how you can give that depth. Is okay, so we have these major defining traits because patterns will exist in any given culture and any given time. So what about people who don't fit that mold? How do they do things? If you have a race that's mostly built around a specific attribute, whether it's war or peace or whether it's commerce, what about the people who don't fit that? What happens when people are outside of their own stereotype? How do they react? And what options are there for them? I think if you start there, you can get some opportunity.
Why am I such a misfit? So I'd say subverting expectations is a big one on this one. So I'd say if you guys ever heard of Pola Magi Madoka Magica or Magical Girl Madoka, that is an anime that is your stereotypical magical girl anime, at least on the surface. But it turns out to be a very brutal, slightly horrific anime. Raven,
it's a cosmic horror,
yeah, it's beautiful and amazing and one of my favorites, but that's because they subvert those expectations. Like, what there are certain pieces that make your usual magical girl anime, and that is you have to have girls, they have to have magic powers. Those magic powers are typically given them by an alien, and you have to have some sort of evil, typically alien menace. And they took all of those and really flipped them on their head, where these girls are pretty much being sacrificed to feed the alien race that have given them the powers in the first place.
Wow.
They feed off the entropy of life and death. But those basic steps are still there. Like, this is still, noticeably an orc race. They could still have the teeth. And one picture, one illustration I love is the literary orc. Got the orc, you've got the tusks, you've got the green skin, right. Or having peace talks with another commander, this orc chieftain, while they're making like battle plans and things like that.
Awesome. Well, we're about out of time, so I want to give each of you guys a chance to give any last thoughts, any closing comments, and let us know where the people watching can find you. So I'll just go in the same order. We'll start with Dylan.
All right. You can find me, if you want to catch me on my podcast, the best place to do that is anywhere podcasts are found, or Spotify. Look for Puckle Podcast. That is PUCL. If you want to hire me for any editing work, I'm currently taking submissions. You can contact me at chapter1editing.com.
So I have one panel left this convention. That's tomorrow at 7:00 at night. And that's about
I'm moderating that one too.
Oh, yeah? Yeah, that one's on art therapy. So
no, wrong one. Sorry.
Darn it.
I'm on your other one.
Yeah, I only have a couple of gaming track ones. I'm mostly on the art track. But you can find me there, or you can always find me on my website. There I have my paint that I handmade. I even just released my new paint set, Elysian Spring, which is all very color shifty colors and
awesome.
Very sparkly. But so you can find me there, and my social media you can find on my website as well, through the link tree that I have linked there. So yeah.
Awesome. Dan.
So I was just looking at my schedule. I got 2 more left, but I am with Dylan and CR here on Intro to Tabletop Role-Playing Games tomorrow at 7. So we've got a recurring group. But you can find me, a good solid spot to start from is my author site, which is guildmastergaming.com. It links out to a blog I do and other writings that I do. I have some short stories published, all sorts of different things from there. The only thing I'd say as a final word to everybody on this is, hey, if you have an idea you're thinking about, just go for it. And if you can't fit it into the system that you're trying to fit it into, take a look around. There's a lot of great games out there to use.
Awesome.
Mm-hmm.